Chapter 10. The Message. They had to scrape and scrape and lick till their tongues felt like emery paper, being careful all the time not to scrape or lick away any writing. Mameluke was right in one respect. The message, for such it was written in blood from a pricked finger. At last the treacle was cleaned off, and there, quite clear upon the poor scrap of rag, showed 3 or 4 words in an educated hand. "And in Norwegian," shouted Nils. He pushed Bernard roughly aside to see better. Bernard didn't mind. "What does it say?" cried Miss Bianca. They had never before seen Nils overcome by emotion. Now he actually used the precious rag to wipe his eyes. "For goodness sake, don't wash anything off," cried Bernard, offering his own spotted handkerchief. "Just tell us what it says." Nils gulped and controlled himself. "It says, well, roughly it just says, shall I ever see Norway again?" For a moment, at these pathetic words, all fell silent. Then, "But at least he's still alive," exclaimed Miss Bianca. It was wonderful what a difference the knowledge made. Each mouse felt a fresh surge of hope and energy. Discussing the matter among themselves, as they did for hours and hours, they decided that the prisoner must have prepared the message in advance and seized an opportunity when Mameluke jumped down into the dungeon to stick it to his fur. However despairing, then, the poor poet, besides being still alive, was still capable of resource. And how much more should they be at liberty, at least within the castle? "We've been idling," cried Nils. "We haven't been using our heads." This wasn't strictly fair, but both Bernard and Miss Bianca understood what he meant. While they didn't know the prisoner was there to be rescued, they had gradually let hopelessness get the better of them and lived from day to day waiting on events. "I shall explore the castle more thoroughly," said Nils, wiping his eyes for the last time. "There must be some way out beside the gate. I've just been sitting on the ledge like a stuffed owl." "I shall make a timetable," said Bernard, "of exactly when the jailers go their rounds and exactly when they unlock the dungeon corridor." "And I," said Miss Bianca, "shall talk to Mameluke." The other two at once stopped making their own plans to argue with her. Even Nils now realized what risk she had just run, and as for Bernard, he could hardly trust himself to speak moderately. "Don't think of it, Miss Bianca," he begged. "Wonderfully as things have turned out, do please believe it's an even greater wonder you're not eaten up this minute. No mouse on earth could talk to Mameluke twice and live to tell the tale. Why he didn't eat you." Miss Bianca looked down at her fan. "I think I fascinate him," she said simply. "You may be perfectly right. Perhaps he does mean to eat me." "Oh dear," sighed Miss Bianca in parenthesis. "How very different in nature in that case from my poor friends." "But he didn't, you know." His expression, as I ran between his paws, was really quite fascinated. "I'm sure he wants to meet me again, if only from dishonorable motives. Let me engage him in conversation and guide it into the right channels, and what may I not learn to our advantage? For if anyone knows everything that goes on in the castle," said Miss Bianca, "it's Mameluke." Bernard and Nils couldn't deny it. "But the danger!" cried Bernard nonetheless. "You and Nils make your plans," said Miss Bianca gently. "Aren't they dangerous too? You have strength and agility. She looked modestly down again, have only charm. You must allow me to employ it. Now good night, dear friends, and in the morning to our tasks." She carried the prisoner's message to bed with her and placed it tenderly under her pillow. Before they all fell asleep, a short conversation took place in the room shared by Nils and Bernard. "Nils," said Bernard. Said Nils sleepily. "Who called Miss Bianca a bit of a nuisance?" There was a slight pause. "I ought to be kicked," said Nils. "If you like, you can come and kick me now." "That's all right," said Bernard. "Good night." 2. Now all was action and enthusiasm again. Nils and Bernard returned to exploring the castle. Nils on the outside, Bernard within. They left Miss Bianca alone as a matter of course. Nils ran about the gray walls, utilizing every nook and cranny, while Bernard even more daringly slipped to and fro at the jailer's heels, noting and memorizing their every movement. Miss Bianca deliberately threw herself in Mama Luke's way, and this was useful to the others too as well, since she kept him fixed in the city room for long periods at a time. Mama Luke couldn't tear himself away from her. It is hard to speak too highly of Miss Bianca's courage, shot with vanity, though it might be. Her gaiety and wit fascinated Mama Luke completely. At the same time, as she came to know him better, she recognized him to be just as cruel and wicked as Bernard said. He did indeed mean to eat her up. He as good as told her so. Can you really be as sweet as you look, little lady? Mama Luke would purr, with horrible double meaning. I wonder what's the way to find out. Then it was always just one more game or one last game to give me an appetite for my dinner, purred Mama Luke. Miss Bianca's nerves were so taut she had to go and lie down as soon as she regained the hole. But she always did regain it. Always at the last moment, by some exquisite trick or clever piece of flattery, she held Mama Luke's paw suspended and then skimmed like a hummingbird to safety. Unluckily, when Mama Luke felt like conversation, it was mostly about himself, and Miss Bianca grew very tired of hearing what a handsome kitten he had been, and what an enormous sum the head jailer had paid for him, and how even dogs in the days when he was out in the world used to howl for mercy at the sight of him. Besides all his other vices, he was a shocking liar. One piece of information, however, she did gather, which she hoped might be highly important. Every New Year's Eve, all the jailers in the castle, including the head, held a midnight feast. From midnight till dawn, not a single one was on duty. And not next morning neither, leered Mama Luke. Indeed? Why is that? Asked Miss Bianca. They've all got bilious attacks, leered Mama Luke. They stuff themselves so. One's supposed to be on duty, the one who takes the prisoners their grub, but it's all he can do to stagger. Miss Bianca's heart beat with excitement, but she kept her wits. And do you have a bilious attack too? She inquired solicitously. Not me, swaggered Mama Luke. I attend, of course, to prevent disappointment, and I eat everything going. But the feast hasn't been spread yet. That could upset my stomach. I am Mama Luke, the iron-tongued. But when Miss Bianca made her report to Nils and Bernard, she added that she was sure he was lying again. He protested too much, she explained. I remember a child at one of the boys' birthday parties who said the same sort of thing until a footman carried him out. In my opinion, Mama Luke won't be on duty either. Which means, said Bernard eagerly, that on that morning, the morning of New Year's Day, we can get into the dungeon corridor, shouted Nils. All of us. And down through the grid, for a mouse can pass where a food pen can't. We may reach the prisoner at last. But as to getting him out, said Bernard, more soberly, we're much where we were. A man can't pass where a mouse can, and even if he could, he'd still be inside the castle. The gate won't open till next autumn, and we could never hide the prisoner until then. At least Nils can speak to him in Norwegian, said Miss Bianca, and keep his spirits up. Nils can call a few words of Norwegian through each grid, like Blondel and Richard I, and as soon as he gets an answer, down I'll jump, promised Nils. But in the meantime, he added, how long is it to New Year's Eve? Bernard ran out and looked at the head jailer's calendar. 3 days, he reported back. In the meantime, said Nils stoutly, I shall go on exploring. They then passed a vote of thanks to Miss Bianca and retired for the night. None of them slept much, however, partly through excitement and partly because there was another thunderstorm. The thunderstorms at this time were more furious than ever. So was the river more furious than ever, lashing and beating between its banks like a captive dragon. Even up in their hole, the mice could hear its voice, ever present between the thunderclaps, and almost more alarming in its steady, thwarted rage. Yet the river was to prove their best, if erratic, friend. 3. 2 days passed in feverish yet unrewarded activity. Bernard gave up making timetables and explored with Nils. They discovered several fresh cracks and crannies. What a buffet the castle had taken, but none of any use to a man-sized prisoner. Then at last, very early after the worst night of all, "Come quick!" cried Nils, pulling the pillow off Bernard's head. To Bernard's surprise, Nils had evidently been out already. His fur was damp and staring from the morning air. "What, before breakfast?" mumbled Bernard. He was still only half awake. "Bother breakfast!" cried Nils. "Come on!" He was away before you could say knife, and now Bernard leaped up and followed. Together, they ran recklessly across the sitting room, out into the corridor, up through the bars of the corridor window, and then down the castle walls to a little boss of rock outjutting from the cliff itself. The last of the gale almost whipped them off their feet. Below snarled the still angry river, tossing and turning in its bed. "See anything different?" asked Nils excitedly. Bernard leaned so far over, Nils had to hold him by the tail. He gazed with all his eyes. There was something different, though at first he couldn't make out what. Then he discerned at the very foot of the cliff, where one rock rose sheer from water, a great jumbled heap of stones. "The castle's crumbling!" cried Bernard. "Not the castle," corrected Nils, hauling him back. "It's too solid." But there was just one weak spot, as the rivers found out. "Look at those stones. Cut stone. Look at those steps. Do you know what I think's down there?" "Go on, tell me," implored Bernard. "An old water gate," said Nils. "Sometime down there's been a water gate. Stands to reason. No one ever built this castle just for a prison," said Nils positively. "In its time it must have been an honest castle with, stands to reason, a water gate. Then it was blocked up, and now the rivers worried it free again, like worrying the stopping out of a tooth. So there is another way out." For a moment, they gave themselves up to happy excitement. Bernard congratulating Nils and slapping him on the back, Nils flourishing his whiskers in honest self-approval. Then Bernard looked over the edge again. "I wonder what part of the castle it leads to," he said practically, "and if it's unblocked all the way." "That we must find out," said Nils. "Come on!"